Before you stands an Egyptian woman. By law, she owns land, can run a business, and can file for divorce. It seems like a paradise for women in the ancient world. But today, the court is sentencing her for adultery. She faces neither a fine nor prison. She will have her nose cut off, or be burned alive. Her lover, the man, walks free, without a single reproach. The system wasn't concerned with morality. It protected a man's unbreakable right to a guaranteed heir, and a wife's infidelity threatened this right. The loss of a nose was a social death. The mutilated face became a permanent mark of shame, denying a woman the right to enter a temple. How could such barbaric, one-sided justice exist in a civilization that gave women unique legal rights? This brutal punishment is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it lies a total system of control. To understand it, we must answer two paradoxes. First, why did Egyptian doctors, capable of performing complex skull surgeries, prescribe women deadly contraceptives made from crocodile dung that cause sepsis? We will find the answer to this medical paradox in Section 4. Second, in a society obsessed with fertility cults and mother goddesses, how could 1 in 3 women die in childbirth? Up to 33% of female burials from the New Kingdom belong to young women between the ages of 15 and 30. The primary mission of her life became her death sentence. We will solve this demographic mystery in Section 5. The answers to these questions are pieces of a larger puzzle that we will begin to assemble right now. This is not just a collection of shocking facts. By the end of this investigation, you will have an arsenal of 7 keys that will unlock the real system of control over women in ancient Egypt. We will dissect everything. Propaganda, law, medicine, social pressure, religion, economics, and even the afterlife. You will learn to see the well-designed system of oppression behind the golden facade of the frescoes. The majestic pyramids will transform from the tombs of pharaohs into backdrops for a hidden female drama that lasted 3,000 years. And we will start with the first key. Right now, we will shatter the very golden facade that has deceived historians for centuries. We will show how the pharaoh's propaganda worked. In just 2 minutes, we will reveal how it created an illusion of paradise, using the shocking story of the only female pharaoh, who was forced to become a man to rule. In every fresco, on every statue, the woman is depicted as an equal partner, slender, elegant, in her husband's embrace. Where did this image of harmony, unique in the ancient world, come from? At first glance, it is direct proof of her high status. But it is a lie. We are unlocking the first key from our arsenal: art as state propaganda. The ideal family was a symbol of Ma'at, divine order. By showing harmony in the home, the pharaoh proved there was harmony throughout the state, strengthening his power. Reality was a harsh blow. The only woman to achieve absolute power, the pharaoh Hatshepsut, was forced to issue a decree, to be depicted with a false beard, the ultimate symbol of male power. Her beard shatters the illusion of equality to its core. Official art worked like a polished bronze mirror. Its purpose was not to show reality, but to reflect the ideal order the pharaoh wanted to see. The images lied. But the real truth is revealed not by frescoes, but by the bones of ordinary women. In a civilization obsessed with documentation, almost no personal stories of women have survived. We know the biographies of hundreds of officials, but almost nothing about their wives and mothers. History was written by male scribes for male patrons. In these texts, a woman was merely a function: his wife, his mother, his daughter. Her personal story had no value. But the picture changes when we turn to the silent witnesses. Analysis of skeletons of common women from workers' settlements shows multiple stress fractures and spinal deformities from carrying heavy loads. Their pelvic bones bear marks resembling scars, the result of tens of thousands of hours spent kneeling at a grinding stone. The real life of a woman, full of grueling labor, was so unimportant that it was simply erased. Every bone of these women screams louder than any inscription in a tomb. Have you ever felt that your hard work goes unnoticed and is left out of the official story? A young Egyptian woman, looking at the ideal images in the temple, believed in this myth. She saw a system that seemed to protect and elevate her. She strove to live up to this ideal, believing in a just reward. But one day in the marketplace, she sees another woman being brutally punished for arguing loudly with her husband. This moment creates a crack in her worldview. Two realities. One painted on the temple walls, the other witnessed in the square. This cognitive dissonance was the norm. Women were taught to believe one thing and live another, constantly doubting their own perceptions. And the most powerful tool for reinforcing this state awaited her on her wedding day. The document that promised her protection was, in fact, her first cage. We have seen how the images on the walls lied. In the next section, we will see how the laws written on papyrus also lied. Why did a system that so carefully crafted a visual lie need to codify it legally? Why weren't the beautiful pictures enough? Visual propaganda worked on the masses, shaping social expectations. It made the myth a part of the culture. But this system had a vulnerability. Any woman could doubt the picture when confronted with reality. Therefore, a mechanism was needed to make her voluntarily and personally accept the rules of the game, even if she suspected the deception. That mechanism was the law, and first and foremost, the marriage contract. The laws were written in the language of protection and rights, so that the lie of propaganda would become a personal signed commitment. This was a brilliant move, turning a tool of control into an illusion of choice. We have proven that the images were a lie. But what if the most insidious traps were hidden in the document that every woman signed with a smile on her wedding day? We are unlocking the second key from our arsenal: law as a beautifully crafted ultimatum. At first glance, the Egyptian marriage contract is a miracle of progress. It gave a woman the right to divorce. It guaranteed her 1/3 of the marital property. It ensured the return of her dowry. It seemed like complete legal protection. But in the contracts from the artisans' village of Deir el-Medina, we find a devilish clause. Just one phrase that negates everything else. If she disobeys, she will leave with empty hands. What constituted disobedience? The law offered no definition. The husband decided. A loud voice, an argument, a refusal. Any action could become a pretext. This contract was like a breath you were never allowed to exhale. It granted rights but took away the power to use them. You had air, but you couldn't breathe. On her wedding day, the young Egyptian woman did not see this trap. Signing the papyrus, she felt a sense of pride. She was told it was her insurance policy, her shield. She believed the law was on her side. Now, let's fast forward a few years. The first serious argument. And in response to her disagreement, her husband says coldly, "Remember the papyrus. One word, and you leave with nothing." In that moment, the shield in her hands turns into a weapon aimed at her. She can leave, but she will end up on the street. Without money, without a home, without a reputation. She had the formal right, but no real choice. In court documents, this was called a reminder of the papyrus. It was a legalized form of psychological abuse. Have you ever faced a situation where formal rules were used for manipulation? But why did women so rarely file for divorce? Proponents of the women's paradise myth point to the archives. See, they were happy. The marriages were strong. This is another lie, masked by statistics. An analysis of court records from Deir el-Medina shows that less than 5% of divorces were initiated by women. But the reason wasn't happiness. It was terror. Even if a woman was prepared to leave destitute, something worse awaited her. Social death. A divorced woman became a disgrace to her family, an outcast. Her chances of remarrying or finding support were zero. The system offered a choice between bad and unbearable. An unhappy marriage was safer than freedom in poverty and shame. Legally, the woman was trapped. But even in this cage, her body did not belong to her. Let's summarize. The legal system created the ideal wife, submissive, silent, and economically dependent. She is locked in a marriage, and her main function is to produce heirs. It seems logical that her health as a future mother should have been a top priority for everyone. But here, too, the system takes a monstrous turn. Concern for her health was replaced by total control over her fertility. Doctors were not interested in the woman as a person, but in her body as a reproductive mechanism to be tested, subjugated, and used. We leave the courtrooms and enter the office of an Egyptian doctor. Here we will unlock the third key and answer the question posed at the very beginning. And what does crocodile dung have to do with it? In the next section, we will examine the medical papyri and show how the female body was turned into a testing ground for barbaric experiments. We are unlocking the third key from our arsenal: medicine as a tool for determining fitness. Egyptian doctors excelled in surgery, but their gynecology was monstrous. Why? Because its goal was not healing, but sorting. The Ka-Hun Papyrus describes tests. A woman urinates on wheat and barley grains. If the wheat sprouts, it will be a girl. If the barley sprouts, a boy. Or an onion was inserted into her vagina overnight. If her breath smelled of onion in the morning, it meant her body was open and ready for conception. At first glance, this seems like primitive diagnostics. But the Ebers Papyrus, 20 meters long, reveals the truth. Infertility was considered exclusively the woman's fault, her defect. And contraception was a humiliating torture. Pessaries made from crocodile dung that cause sepsis. This is not care. This is a cruel experiment on a body that was not considered valuable in itself. But control over fertility was just the beginning. Medicine found a way to control a woman's very soul through the most popular diagnosis in Egypt. That diagnosis was the wandering womb. Doctors believed the womb was a living creature inside a woman that, if not pregnant, would begin to starve and move around the body in search of moisture, pressing on organs and causing everything from headaches to hysteria. The treatment was a ritual of suppression. Incense was placed in the vagina to lure the womb down, and foul-smelling substances were held near the mouth and nose to scare it away from the top. The womb was imagined as an uprooted plant that, finding no soil for pregnancy, begins to wither and poison everything around it. But the most terrifying part was something else. Any protest, anger, or sadness from a woman was immediately attributed to a sick womb. Her personality, her character, were declared symptoms of a disease requiring immediate intervention. A woman was treated not for an illness, but for being herself. This method of controlling her personality prepared her for the ultimate trial, where her life held almost no value. Imagine for a second. Any strong emotion you feel, anger at injustice, deep sadness, even exuberant joy, is immediately explained by your doctor as a symptom of a disease organ. What feeling does this evoke first? Fear of a potential illness, or anger that your personality is being reduced to a malfunctioning organ? That feeling is the key to understanding the daily psychological pressure. Egyptian women were taught not to trust their own emotions, perceiving them as signs of sickness. This was the perfect preparation for their main and most terrifying mission. We have seen how medicine controlled unfit or sick women. But what awaited those who were deemed healthy? The answer is paradoxical. The worst thing was to be declared healthy. because health, in the system's view, meant only one thing: fertility, readiness to fulfill her primary mission. As soon as a woman was deemed capable of childbearing, she embarked on the most dangerous path of her life, a path from which 1 in 3 would not return. Society demanded heirs from her but gave her no guarantee of survival. A single verdict from a doctor, healthy, became the start of a fatal countdown.
This brings us to the answer to the second question posed at the beginning. In a society obsessed with fertility, giving birth was the most dangerous thing a woman could do. In the next section, we will show why. We are unlocking the fourth key from our arsenal: social pressure as a death sentence. In Egypt, a woman was not considered a complete person until she gave birth. Childlessness was a curse. Her entire status depended on producing an heir. This was her sole mission. Paleopathological studies show that up to 1/3 of all Egyptian women died young from childbirth complications. It was the #1 cause of female mortality for 3,000 years. Millions of lives lost. The conclusion is shockingly cynical. The mother's life was valued less than that of the potential heir. Her death was an acceptable production loss on the merciless assembly line of creating a new generation. The fertility cult was a cult not of the mother, but of her function. A 1 in 3 chance of death. It's as if every third modern airplane flight ended in a crash. But Egyptian women had no choice. The statistics are horrifying. But what exactly turned a natural event into a deadly lottery? A woman gave birth squatting on 2 special bricks, the mesonet, decorated with images of goddesses. Midwives assisted her, and spells were recited. At first glance, it was a ritual, not an execution. But the devil was in what was absent. There was no elementary understanding of hygiene. There was no knowledge of obstetric techniques. Any complication, an abnormal fetal position, tearing, hemorrhaging, was a death sentence. It was a lottery where everything depended on chance. And here is the main blow to the myth of advanced medicine. Doctors were not allowed here. Childbirth was considered an exclusively female, ritually impure domain, and therefore unimportant and unworthy of the attention of real science. Women were left to die, abandoned to the will of the gods in ignorance. The process was like starting a complex machine without an instruction manual. As long as everything went according to plan, it worked. At the slightest malfunction, everything broke down irreversibly. What did an ordinary Egyptian woman feel as she prepared for her first birth? On the surface, hope. She dreamed of a child, of society's approval, of status. She hoped to give birth to a son and fulfill her duty. But beneath this hope lay a chilling terror. She had seen her friends, her sisters, perhaps her own mother die. She knew the statistics not from papyri, but from real life. She understood that the upcoming event could be her last day. This was preparation not for a celebration, but for a life or death battle. Before giving birth, a woman wrote a farewell letter and drew up a will, passing on her modest belongings, a mirror, sandals, a comb, to her sisters. And even if she survived this lottery, the system had a new humiliation prepared for her. Having survived a mortal battle, a woman did not become a saint. On the contrary, she became a source of defilement. So a woman's primary mission was a game of Russian roulette, imposed by society. What did a woman who was lucky enough to survive receive?
Honor, respect, the status of a heroine? Logic suggests it should be so. She risked her life for the continuation of the lineage. But the system worked differently. Instead of honors, the surviving mother received the status of unclean. Her body, which had performed the miracle of birth, was now considered defiled. She was forbidden from entering temples and participating in religious rituals for a long time. The system punished a woman even for successfully completing her mission. Having survived the physical threat of death, she faced the threat of spiritual isolation. The most natural event in a woman's life became the reason for her exile from the world of the gods. In the next section, we will explain how this religious weapon worked. We are unlocking the fifth key from our arsenal: religion as a weapon of isolation. A paradox arises. How, in a civilization that worshipped Isis in Hathor, could an earthly woman be considered inherently unclean? At first glance, the answer is simple. The concept of ritual purity, wab, applied to everyone. To approach the gods, both men and women had to undergo purification. It seems like a fair and universal system. But the reality for women was different. A man's impurity resulted from his actions. Contact with a dead body. A woman's impurity was built into her biology, menstruation and childbirth. This was not a temporary inconvenience, but a systematic and regular exclusion from temples, festivals, and public life. Her biology, the source of new life, was declared her primary spiritual defect. Temple regulations explicitly forbade a woman from even looking toward a sanctuary on the days of her blood. It was a perfect, self-regulating mechanism of isolation that locked a woman away for months. The culture extolled fertility, but punished the very act of childbirth with the longest period of social exile. Why? At first glance, the rules seem minor. During menstruation, a woman could not cook for her priest husband. This looked like a domestic restriction. But the numbers are staggering. Temple regulations show that the purification period after the birth of a boy was 40 days. After a girl, it was 80. Almost 3 months. This wasn't about hygiene. It was confinement. Over her reproductive life, a woman could spend a total of several years in a state of impurity. The effect worked like soil erosion. Each period of isolation gradually washed away her social status and self-esteem. Imagine her grief when she could not attend her own father's funeral because she was defiled after childbirth. Have you ever been excluded from an important event for a reason you couldn't? Control? What happens when divine law collides with the human heart? An ordinary Egyptian woman most likely accepted these rules as the unshakable will of the gods. She believed this was how the world was ordered. But a general rule becomes a personal tragedy. There she stands, outside the temple complex during the main city festival. She hears the music, the laughter, smells the roasting meat and incense, but cannot enter because she is unclean. Her child is sick. She needs to pray. But the gods are unavailable to her. Religion offered not comfort, but a source of pain and alienation, constantly reminding her of her defectiveness. Her shadow on the temple wall is a perfect symbol of her exclusion. But this spiritual oppression was only one side of the coin. The other, no less cruel, concerned what was considered the Egyptian woman's greatest strength: her property. So we have established how religion, despite a pantheon of goddesses, systematically isolated women. The concept of ritual impurity was not just a dogma, but a powerful tool of social control that turned female biology into a weapon against women themselves. But what about the famous right of Egyptian women to own property? Surely a woman who owned land and slaves could simply ignore these restrictions. After all, economic freedom is considered the main argument for the Golden Age. We will now move from spiritual suppression to exposing the economic deception. We will unlock the sixth key and prove why. For an Egyptian woman, wealth most often meant not freedom, but merely more expensive golden shackles. We are unlocking the sixth key from our arsenal: economics as golden shackles. On papyri, we see women buying slaves and leasing land. It seems like independence. But court archives from Deir el-Medina reveal a strange detail. A woman is named the owner of the house, but she cannot sell that house without her husband's signature. How is this possible? For any major transaction, his consent was required. The law viewed the man as the manager of all family property, including her personal property. She owned, but he controlled. The system worked like breathing. The woman was the lungs. She inhaled and held the property. But the husband was the brain, deciding when to exhale. Her property was not a shield, but an anchor that kept her in the marriage. And this anchor was especially heavy when it came to inheritance. While in Greece and Rome, daughters received almost nothing, in Egypt they inherited equally with their brothers. The pinnacle of justice? No. It was a cunning mechanism for transferring assets. At the moment of marriage, her inheritance automatically came under her husband's management. The woman was not an heir, but a transit point for wealth that simply flowed from her father's family to her husband's family. Court records over 50 years show 112 transactions involving female inheritance. In 109 of them, the husband made the decision, often without her even being present in court. How did this legal theory look in real life? A young Egyptian woman receives a plot of land as her dowry. This is her guarantee, her island of security. But one day her husband, Thamos, gets into debt over beer. To pay it off, he sells 3 of the 5 donkeys she inherited. Her protest is meaningless. The elders confirm. The husband is the head of the household, and his actions are perfectly legal. In that moment, she realizes that her property is a fiction. She is merely the custodian of assets that someone else controls. She understood that in this life, nothing belonged to her. But the most terrifying discovery still lay ahead. We have exposed the legal traps, the medical violence, the religious branding, and now, the economic slavery. Every pillar of the famed Egyptian freedom has turned out to be an illusion, part of a vast system of control. All earthly paths to independence are blocked. But one main path remained, the last hope for every Egyptian, the path to eternity. Surely, before the court of Osiris, a woman could finally become an equal. We will now look beyond the threshold of death to unlock the 7th and final key from our arsenal. What if even death was not liberation for her, but a transition to a new, eternal form of slavery? We are unlocking the 7th and final key, the afterlife as an ultimatum. On the walls of tombs, husband and wife walk hand in hand into eternity, equal before the gods. This is the last, most beautiful lie. In the main guide to the afterlife, the Book of the Dead, her voice is absent. All the spells, all 42 justifications before the court of Osiris, are spoken only by him. I, the scribe Ani, am pure. His wife stands behind him, a silent shadow. Her status in eternity was to be attached to him. She did not have her own passport to the afterlife. She was baggage that her husband carried with him, contingent on his success. But if the husband was the ticket, what happened to those who didn't have one? What awaited a widow or an unmarried woman? Eternal oblivion. Logic suggests her guide became her father or son. It seemed the system had a backup plan. But inscriptions on sarcophagi reveal a truth that is even more humiliating. A man was buried as an individual, the great official Patamos. A woman, almost always as a function. Daughter of so-and-so, wife of so-and-so, mother of so-and-so. Even before the supreme judge Osiris, her personal virtues and sins were irrelevant. She was judged not for who she was, but for her connection to a man. Her soul was like a vessel, inscribed not with a name, but with property of so-and-so. Imagine your name and all your achievements being erased, and in eternity you are known only as the spouse of so-and-so. How does that make you feel? This existential terror was the strongest chain. What force made her endure injustice, cruelty, and infidelity? Not the fear of poverty, not the fear of shame, but a panic-stricken fear of eternal oblivion. There she is, now elderly, caring for her sick husband. Her care is not just about love. It contains a primal terror. She fears not his death, but that he will die displeased with her and not take her with him, condemning her soul to wander forever in darkness. This was the perfect tool of control. The system held hostage not her body or her purse, but her immortal soul. In some funerary texts, a husband could even reject his wife in the afterlife, condemning her to a second final death. Total oblivion. The control was total. From the propaganda on temple walls to the spells in the Book of the Dead. From a doctor's prescription to a clause in a marriage contract. From the cradle to the grave and beyond. All 7 keys we have unlocked were not separate locks, but cogs in a single, giant, merciless machine. We have finished the excavation. Now, the assembly begins. In the final part, we will piece this horrifying mosaic together. We will not just list the facts, but show how they interacted to create a perfect prison without walls, and understand why this truth forces us to completely rewrite the history of ancient Egypt. We look again at the ideal frescoes where this investigation began. But now our eyes see not harmony, but a brilliant camouflage. This is not just a lie. It is a well-designed symbiosis. Propaganda, our first key, created the myth of equality so that a woman would trustingly sign the marriage contract. Our second key. In the fictitious right to property, our 6th key, gave this myth material confirmation. She saw a house she believed was hers and trusted the system. It was a closed loop. Propaganda made the legal deception acceptable, and the legal deception made the propaganda convincing. We have answered the first question. Rights on paper offered no salvation, because the paper itself was wrapped in a beautiful lie. Now let's look at the Egyptian woman's body. It was a battlefield where another, no less cruel alliance operated. Medicine, our 3rd key, sorted women, determining their fitness for childbearing. As soon as a body was deemed useful, social pressure, our 4th key, came into play, turning childbirth into a deadly mission with a 2 in 3 chance of survival. And even if a woman survived, religion, our 5th key, punished her body for this feat, declaring it unclean. This was a 3-fold seizure of control. The body did not belong to the woman. It was a resource for her husband, a testing ground for doctors, and a source of defilement for priests. We have answered the second question. Medicine did not heal the woman. It calibrated her fitness for a merciless system. We have built the structure of the prison, legal walls, economic bars, and physical shackles. But this prison had a master lock that made escape unthinkable. Our 7th key, the afterlife as an ultimatum, devalued any earthly resistance. Why fight over donkeys or argue with your husband if your eternity depends on his mercy? The panicked fear of eternal oblivion made all other levers of pressure virtually irresistible. The oppression of women in Egypt was not a collection of cruelties. It was a holistic, self-regulating system of control, one of the most sophisticated in history. This system was like a carnivorous plant. Propaganda was the sweet nectar that lured her in. The laws were the slippery walls that prevented escape. And the fear of eternal oblivion was the digestive fluid that ultimately dissolved her will to resist. Now that you see the whole picture, now that the 7 interlocking elements of control are laid out before you. It is time for the final question. On one hand, there is overt physical cruelty, the cutting off of a nose, deadly childbirth, sepsis from crocodile dung. Let's call this by one word: physical. On the other hand, there is the invisible systemic oppression, the legal trap in a contract, the erased identity in the Book of the Dead, the illusion of ownership. Let's call this by one word: system. Answer one question. In this 3,000-year machine of horror, what wounds you more deeply? Write just one word in the comments: physical or system. Your answer will show what leaves deeper scars: the lash of a whip or the weight of an invisible cage.